Before we dive in, smash that like button, subscribe, share this video, and comment which city you're watching from right now because trust me, what you're about to read gets wild. The fluorescent lights at Prudent Globe hummed like a tired mechanical bee. They painted the open-plan floor a color Zoe had never learned to like, fluorescent beige. Her desk looked like a personality midlife crisis, post-its in 3 tones of panic, 2 half-sipped coffees, an ancient planner with the spine on its last nerve, and Milo, a succulent she'd named because giving a plant a personality made surviving corporate life slightly more tolerable. Zoe Douglas rubbed a finger over the rim of her latest coffee cup and tried to remember what the word relax actually meant. 48 hours of crushed sleep and 3 looming presentations had made relax a mythology from a happier childhood. Her hands moved on autopilot, sorting spreadsheet cells while her brain, traitorous and loud, rewound every curt text from Kevin Davis that morning. Need revised sales forecasts by noon. I know you can handle it. She could handle it. She could do anything. She owned the art of doing impossible things for low pay and high anxiety. Still, when the little thrill of rebellion crawled up her spine, when the idea of closing her laptop and walking out into the city and never, ever opening a spreadsheet again, she indulged in what she privately called research. It was a short, self-contained rebellion. Open a browser. Type ridiculous things. Laugh at yourself. Delete. She ducked her head, checked that no one was staring. No one was. And let her fingers fly. How to quit a job without notice. Delete. Survive on ramen and spite. Delete. Ways to make your boss disappear legally. Delete. She grinned, imagining Milo listening with judgmental green leaves. The searches were small safety valves, the sort of ridiculous fantasies that kept adults from combusting. She typed one final query, the one that felt like a dare. How to fire your billionaire boss. She hit enter, then immediately felt both foolish and oddly liberated. The search results loaded. Vague blog posts about corporate strategy, a listicle about handling difficult supervisors, and a lawyer's dry answer somewhere down the list. Helpful? Not exactly. Satisfying? A little. The click of Italian leather on polished concrete made her freeze. She didn't need to look up to know the sound. Kevin Davis walked like someone who understood that silence was a privilege he could afford. He carried the kind of confidence that didn't announce itself in words. It arrived and consumed the air. Douglas, he said, near enough that she could smell mint and something woodsy, like a faint trace of his cologne. The single word was professional, efficient, the way a metronome marks off measures of command. She kept her eyes low. Yes, Mr. Davis? The Fletcher proposal. Where is it? For a full 2 seconds, she believed with every fragile fiber that she had the deadline correct. The one due tomorrow, she said, because that was what her notes, printed in neat little colored boxes and tortured underlines, had promised her. He lifted one eyebrow. Today. She felt a tiny, ungraceful squeak in her chest that might have been panic and might have been a tiny, shameful, ashamed laugh. Of course, she said, smiling the sort of smile that had saved many careers and ruined many nights. I'll get it to you. He studied her for a beat too long, like he was looking for whether the person in front of him would snap or thrive. Then he turned and walked away, leaving a breeze of expensive scent and the memory of an impossible expectation. Zoe let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding and buried her face in her hands. If I disappear tonight, she muttered to Milo, wipe my browser history. There's a special kind of calamity reserved for when your private rebellion becomes public. Zoe had just started scrolling further into a rabbit hole about job outcome experiments when her screen went black. Not the convenient, save and restart later. Black. The ominous, heart-sinking black. She slapped at the power button like one of those old TV commercials where you could fix anything with the right amount of willpower. Nothing. She checked cables, yanked at the USB, even apologized out loud to the machine. Computers, like certain people, were not moved by apologies. A voice behind her, dry, amused, said, Technical issue, Douglas? She cartwheeled in her chair and nearly fell out of it. Kevin stood there, closer than he'd been 2 heartbeats ago, looming in a way that made her chest tight. She could see the frozen city through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. She could also see exactly how ridiculous she must have looked with her hair half unbraided and a post-it masquerading as a to-do list. "It's fine," she managed. "Probably just a reboot." He didn't smile. He pressed the power button himself, a practiced motion like he fixed lesser things with protocol rather than panic. His arm brushed hers. Something electric skittered up her wrist. The machine hummed back to life, and the desktop blinked, obligingly restoring whatever she'd been doing. And there it was, right on the screen in bold, practical font: "How to fire your billionaire boss." She felt every color drain out of her, then flood back in, hot and humiliating. The air left her in a small, embarrassed whoosh. She turned slowly, the way you turn when you know you're about to be executed for a misdemeanor. Kevin looked from the monitor to her, his face unreadable until something happened that no one in the office handbook had prepared her for. He laughed. Not a quiet, superior chuckle. Not the laugh of a man who'd always been above jokes. It spilled out of him surprised, bright, natural. Zoe blinked, as if the sound was a misfiled memo. It was almost obscene to hear him laugh after being the vector of so many impossible deadlines. She watched his shoulders loosen in a way that made the rest of the room feel oddly warmer. "Points for creativity, Douglas," he said, wiping at the corner of his eye with one thumb as if it had caught on something unexpectedly human. "Did you find any useful tutorials?" Her mouth opened and closed like an outboard motor. "It was stress research," she blurted, because truth in small doses felt like the only polite thing to offer, and market analysis, and hypothetical escape plans. He tilted his head, genuinely curious. "Hypothetical escape plans?" She gestured at Milo, at the post-its, at the army of coffee cups like confessions. "Sometimes you just want to know your exit strategies." Kevin pulled a chair from somewhere and sat, the motion casual enough to be disarming. For the next hour, they did something neither of them had likely signed up to do at the office. They talked about ridiculous career fantasies, about the romanticized notion of lighthouse keeping a job she'd Googled in a moment of particularly poetic fatigue, about pineapples on pizza and why ranch dressing deserved better PR. He told her, knitting the conversation with self-deprecating little admissions, that he'd nearly bought a llama farm once because it made him laugh. She confessed she could burn water without trying. It was dangerously ordinary, the kind of conversation you only ever hear in apartments over red wine or in the margins of weekends. It was not supposed to happen beneath fluorescent lights and a sliding glass office door, and every time Zoe let her guard down, she felt the hairline crack between employee and employer widen into something she neither wanted to name nor deny. When Kevin stood to leave, he paused at her desk and said, with a mischievous glint that made her stomach tumble, "Incognito next time, Douglas. It sees everything. Sweet dreams." She watched the elevator doors swallow him and found herself smiling at the ridiculous text that popped up on her phone 2 minutes later. "Kevin D. My pleasure. Sweet dreams, Zoe." She tucked the phone into her pocket and sifted through her scattered professionalism for whatever composure was left. Her cheeks still felt warm from the unexpected intimacy. She had survived humiliation and been rewarded with a strange, bright thing: curiosity. She had also, more dangerously, been led into the orbit of a man who had the capacity to rearrange entire markets, and possibly, she realized with a cold little jolt, the capacity to become a target because of her. She glanced at Milo. The succulent looked like it was waiting for the punchline. Zoe breathed out and, for a moment, allowed herself to wonder whether staying might be an adventure rather than a prison sentence. Her phone vibrated again. A note from IT. Routine overnight security scan scheduled. The message was antiseptic and ordinary, but in the corner of the security console, a small light blinked an alert no one had time for. An unrecognized access attempt had pinged the server. Zoe's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She had just turned a private fantasy into something people could read. She had also, in one of those small flares of irony the universe likes to throw, become someone a stranger might find interesting. Before we go any further, quick reminder: smash that like button, subscribe, share, and drop which city you're watching from in the comments. If you're into slow-burn office chaos with a side of corporate sabotage, you're in the right place. Kevin's message had come like a dare. 7 p.m. A project. I'll need your creative brain. It was vague in the way billionaires are vague, precise in tone, casual in command. Zoe debated for 37 seconds. Then she texted back, "I'll be there." Curiosity beat terror. When she pushed open Kevin's office door that evening, expecting clipped instructions and a PowerPoint, she found the unexpected: an avalanche of takeout. The polished mahogany desk was a makeshift buffet, neatly labeled containers from 6 different restaurants, each one steaming and fragrant. Thai, basil, the sharp tang of citrus from a Vietnamese place, buttery garlic from an Italian spot. A stack of tacos that smelled like charred heaven, and a box of sushi on the side that gleamed like tiny, perfect jewels. Kevin had shed his jacket. His sleeves were rolled up to the forearm, revealing the casualness of a man who could buy whatever he wanted and still chose to unwrap chopsticks by hand. He was waiting like someone who'd planned a small, private war of flavors. "You came," he said, the surprise in his voice sounding less like astonishment and more like relief. Zoe tried to act unimpressed and failed spectacularly. "I have a curious palate," she said. Liar. She'd eaten an entire tub of instant noodles that afternoon because the cafeteria line was too long, but she helped herself to a spring roll and let the sweet heat make her grin. Kevin gestured toward the spread. "Project is tonight's table." "I realized I don't actually know what you like." For research." "For research?" Zoe repeated, buttering a piece of garlic bread as if she'd always meant to be a food critic. "You sent a procurement department to test me?" He smiled. A real smile this time, disarming in its slight crookedness. "I asked my assistant for help. Margaret thinks culinary brute force is the best path to truth." They ate in the soft hum of the city below, the glass wall making their little table feel like a private cloud. As plates cleared and chopsticks surrendered, the tone shifted. Kevin leaned back, and the pretense of CEO impermeability thinned. "You're not supposed to ask employees to help with personal projects," Zoe said, half teasing, half defensive. "What exactly is this project?" Kevin's eyes, usually steady and unreadable, had a small crack of fatigue. "Figuring out what makes someone stay," he said. "People leave a lot. I've always assumed the math of money and titles explained it. But then you didn't quit after the Morrison debacle, or the 3 a.m. email wave. Or when I asked for the impossible, you stayed. You do it with stubbornness. That's a useful trait." Zoe felt heat climb her neck, but this time it wasn't embarrassment. It felt like recognition. Stubbornness or masochism? She offered. "Stubbornness," he countered. "Masochism is usually less effective at work." She laughed. The sound loosened something between them. "How do you stand it?" she asked him, suddenly curious about the man behind the press releases and the piercing headlines. Running everything. The pressure. He toyed with a piece of sushi, as if it could answer truths he'd kept for the boardroom. "You learn to be lonely in different ways," he said. "People like me get offered versions of themselves. People who want access. People who want validation. People who want to climb. Most of them aren't interested in you. They're interested in the position that looks like you." He paused, then, in a breath that seemed hesitant for the first time, added, "I nearly bought a llama farm once." Zoe blinked. "A llama farm?" "Yes," he said, leaning forward. The businessman replaced for a moment by something unpolished and human. It was absurd. "I was in a board meeting, and the slides were about vertical integration, and I thought of llamas, because they're ridiculous and soft, and would probably make everyone laugh. I wanted to buy them and name one shareholder. I didn't, obviously, but the thought stuck because it made me laugh during something that otherwise felt hopelessly rote. The image lodged in Zoe's chest, this impeccably tailored billionaire, picturing livestock for the sake of a laugh. It was disarming. She found herself telling a truth she hadn't planned to say out loud. "I have student loans," she confessed, surprising herself with the simplicity of the admission, "and a terrible credit score from an ill-advised used car purchase in grad school. I have a roommate who uses my living room as a second office, and Milo here." She tapped the small succulent she'd smuggled in, now perched on Kevin's side table like a tiny emissary. Is the closest thing I have to long-term stability. Kevin chuckled. And his laugh wasn't the awkward, spontaneous one from last week. It felt like a recognition, a companion sound. Milo has excellent taste in coworkers, he said. So do you. You know how to smooth jagged numbers into something beautiful. That's a talent most people don't appreciate. Translation: you don't appreciate most people, Zoe quipped. I appreciate the people who do the hard things, he replied. The ones who stay and make the work sing. She told him about making ramen and pretending it was gourmet. About how she once ruined a wedding cake assignment in a part-time job and still walked out with a generous tip and a lesson in humility. He confessed he'd once accidentally sponsored a local yodeling contest because he misread a charity brief. They traded small, ridiculous failures the way people trade business cards, revelations that revealed more than credentials ever could. At one point, Kevin grew serious. I read some of your other searches, he said casually, like commenting on the weather. Zoe's face dropped into a puzzled frown. You did? Panic threaded through her voice like an unwelcome violin. Margaret mentioned the highlights, he said, hands raised in mock surrender. She flagged the lighthouse keeper thing, the dog-walking business, and, for artistry's sake, the wedding crasher career. She thought you were charmingly industrious. I thought, you had vision. You channel curiosity into solutions. It's one of the reasons I kept you on. It was startling to hear praise from someone who could rearrange a department with an offhand email. Zoe felt something warm in her chest that wasn't embarrassment this time. It was dangerously pride. Why not just say that in an email? She asked. Because an email doesn't taste like this, he said, tapping a fork against a plate. And because I wanted to know if the person who survives Prudent Globe's quarterly storms would do it with a sense of humor. They lingered in those small confessions until the city lights winked off one by one and the office around them quieted into an intimate hush. Kevin was a study in contradictions, ruthless in negotiations, unexpectedly tender in private. Zoe realized she was learning the shape of his loneliness, and, uncomfortably, the shape of a path that might have both risk and reward. Her phone buzzed on the table, a small, polite sound that broke the bubble. It was a notification from building security. Routine overnight scan scheduled. A harmless ping, except the console in the corner. A bank of small monitors that usually reflected nothing more urgent than late-night cleaning carts blinked a yellow alert. For a heartbeat, the room chilled. Kevin's face, previously open and almost soft, narrowed a fraction. Probably nothing, he said, too quickly. It landed like a pebble in the pool of their conversation. They sat, inches apart across plates and empty wine glasses, the space between them charged and vulnerable. The moment leaned toward something more than friendship and less than a public declaration. Zoe felt, with a clarity that was both thrilling and terrifying, the pull of leaning in. Kevin's hand moved, an accidental brush across the table, fingertips grazing hers. Neither of them pulled back. The world narrowed to the small warmth under his touch, the electric static of possibility. Then, like a director cue in a play that had been running too long, the security console flashed red and a harsh beep sliced the room. Both heads snapped toward the monitors. What's happening? Zoe breathed. Kevin's jaw tightened. For the first time all evening, the laugh lines around his eyes were gone. He rose in a single, fluid motion. Stay, he said. But his voice had command in it now. Not the playful command of a man ordering food, but the sharp edge of someone who had enemies he'd learned to expect. The mood shifted, sleight of hand gone wrong. The romantic hush had been cleaved by a threat that smelled faintly of other people's designs. Zoe's curiosity slid into an animal alert. Whatever had pinged the server room, whatever anonymous hand had rummaged through code, they had not only discovered her private rebellion, they had found leverage. Quick reminder before this gets intense, smash that like button, subscribe, share, and comment right now which city you're watching from. If you want Zoe to fight back, tell me where you're watching from and say Team Zoe in the comments. Alright, let's go. The security console was a small island of harsh light in the dark office, its monitors mapping every corner of Prudent Globe like a series of patient, indifferent witnesses. Kevin stood over it with the cold professional focus that had made him a billionaire. Jaw set, shoulders squared, the kind of posture that suggested the human body could be another kind of asset if you treated it that way. Zoe's pulse was a feral animal in her throat. She watched the timeline scroll. 9 minutes past midnight, Tom Richardson's badge swiped in the staff elevator. 9:02, he appeared on camera moving down the hallway, a backpack over one shoulder, his silhouette casual, unhurried. 9:05, he crouched by Zoe's desk, cables snaking from his pack like a technical viper. The footage was grainy but damning. The tablet in his hands flashing a progress bar, the light on Zoe's tower blinking as something large and discreet was siphoned away. "You sure that's Tom?" Zoe's voice was smaller than she wanted it to be. Kevin didn't look at her when he answered. "Yes." They watched him like spectators at a petty crime opera. Tom's fingers worked with patient competence. He plugged, unplugged, redirected network shares to local storage. He deleted files with the kind of boredom reserved for daily chores. At one point, he smiled at the camera as if aware it was watching, that tiny, infuriating smirk not meant to be seen but performing precisely for those who were paying him to perform. "Who's he working for?" Zoe asked. Her hands twitched. The images on the screen were intimate. Her desktop, her personal files, messages, a folder labeled personal backups she hadn't meant to name so candidly. A single click and private life became corporate ammunition. Kevin's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling logs, tracing IPs, cross-referencing access times. "Private contractor," he said, "paid by someone external. Someone with deep pockets and patience." Zoe felt small and exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the night's intimate food and conversation. Her texts to her roommate, pictures of Milo, the photograph of her father at her college graduation, all of it lay there, vulnerable and wholesome and suddenly weaponized. Worse, the recording of the evening with Kevin, the laughter, the way his hand had brushed hers. That file existed now, not as a private moment, but as a leverage point. "Why me?" Zoe whispered. "Why take my stuff?" Kevin's jaw hardened. "Because you're close to me." That sentence hit like a thrown stone. Closeness was not a safe thing when your life sat at the intersection of power and predators. Zoe's stomach lurched with a hot, righteous fury that made her hands shake. Whoever had hired Tom knew exactly how to hurt Kevin. They would use Zoe's life as a wedge and pry open anything valuable underneath. On a monitor in the corner, another camera feed flicked. 3 men appeared in the lobby, suited but not quite corporate anxiety disguised in tailored jackets. They didn't look like PR reps. They moved like men used to being obeyed. One of them checked his phone, probably syncing arrival times, probably getting instructions. They rode the elevator up, and the timeline marked them. 9:21 elevator doors closed. 9:24, they stepped into the hallway. Kevin exhaled the way intruders do when they realize the house is awake. His voice was low and flat. "They're here for leverage," he said. "They want to influence the acquisition vote. They think blackmail will force my hand." Zoe had a sudden, absurd mental image of men in white gloves inserting a crowbar into the company's deal room. Her blood hummed. What do they want? He looked at her as if debating whether to tell her the whole truth. "They want me to withdraw support for the Cranford acquisition. They think if I'm distracted or discredited, the board will fold. Or they want concessions that will give them control. And if you don't," Zoe began. "They release a narrative," he finished. "Pictures, timestamps, edited conversations. They make it smell like something sordid. It's less about the truth than the spectacle." Tom's smirk crawled across the screen again as the elevator doors opened. He was not a lone hacker. He was an instrument. Zoe felt anger like a bright flame under the skin of her palms. She thought of Milo, of her student loans, of the small, stubborn reasons she'd stayed in a role that chewed at her. She did not want her life to become a bargaining chip for corporate greed. Kevin moved with sudden, brutal efficiency. "Security, lock the lower levels. No external access to servers until we trace the sink. Margaret, call my attorney." He barked commands like a man who had carved protocols out of his life for times like this. Zoe felt at once out of place and exactly where she needed to be. The adrenaline had burned away the embarrassment from the earlier night and replaced it with a keener focus. "What can I do?" she asked. "Stay low," Kevin said, the protective edge in his voice sharp and literal now. "For public optics, it's better if you aren't visible until we know the narrative." "But," his eyes met hers, fast and intense, "if they try to use you, I want your permission to fight. Not to hide you, to expose them." Zoe's first instinct was to recoil, hide, be small, let him shoulder the danger. But the thought of letting her life be rearranged by strangers like a chessboard piece made her stomach twist. She had spent months making compromises, bending into shapes that fit corporate templates. The idea that someone else could decide her fate without her say-so tightened her jaw. "No," she said, surprising herself with how steady the word sounded. "Don't hide me. Don't use me as a shield. If we're doing this, we do it together. I'm not a pawn." Kevin's expression shifted, admiration flickering across his face. He moved a half-step closer. Not to kiss, not to touch, but to align. "Good," he said. "Then help me trace it." They worked until the monitors blurred into a field of data and faces. Tom's hardware had been clumsy but thorough. He'd used a pocket server to mirror directory structures and mask traffic through an external VPN. Zoe watched the map of connections sprout and fold like a city at night, routes lighting up, then pulling into shadows. Kevin coordinated with legal and IT, arms folded around a strategy that read like a surgical plan. At one point, Zoe found herself watching Tom on the screen again. He lodged in her mind with the smugness of someone who thought he'd bought an invulnerability that could be rented. She wanted to go downstairs, to drag him into the light herself. But Kevin's hand stopped her on her elbow, gentle but firm. "Not yet," he said. "We set the trap. We don't storm without a camera rolling." They baited. A fabricated file path with false timestamps, a phantom folder labeled with keywords designed to tempt the greedy. Kevin smiled a small, dangerous smile, the one that belonged to a man who had learned boardroom games could become theater. He set the decoy and then sent a quiet ping into the network, let it shimmer like a lure. The minutes crawled. On the south monitor, an alert flared. Someone had accepted the decoy. The progress bar ticked. Tom's smirk widened as he accessed the fake folder. The camera caught his face lit by the tablet like a guilty child choosing a candy in the dark. Zoe felt vindicated in a way that had nothing to do with victory and everything to do with agency. She was not, she decided, going to be reduced to a headline. She would not let her life be rearranged on someone else's terms. Tom's smirk faded, replaced by a hard, professional mask. He had been careful. Too careful. He had been paid not to be sloppy. That made him dangerous. On the feed, his hands moved to prepare an upload. Zoe's stomach dropped. Tom's lips curved in a way Zoe recognized now as delight at the predictable cruelty of the world. He typed something and then, as if to savor the moment, looked straight into the camera. His voice, recorded but audible, came through the lab speakers with a smug clarity. "You think you can trap us," he said. "This is nothing. You don't get it yet. There are timelines you should see them when she Googled how to seduce versus how to fire. That narrative writes itself. It's already more useful than you think." The words landed like a hand on Zoe's throat. Timelines. Edits. Context removed. The blackmailers had not only siphoned her files, they intended to craft a narrative that would make her look complicit, confused, or culpable. They wanted to make her the spectacle and, by extension, make Kevin the distracted fool. Zoe tasted copper. Rage polished into a blade. She thought of the nights she'd stayed late, the times she'd patched presentations while watching the city sleep. She thought of being small so others could be large. She thought of Milo, patient and green and stubborn in its pot. "No," she said quietly, and this time the word held a different weight. "Then we make our own timeline." Kevin's hand closed over hers, firm and warm. "Team Zoe?" he asked, half question, half oath. "Team Zoe," she answered. "Quick reminder before this gets surgical. Smash that like button. Subscribe. Share. And drop which city you're watching from. And if you think Zoe's about to outsmart a billionaire-level smear campaign, type Team Zoe in the comments. This chapter is where she stops being reactive and starts moving pieces. When Zoe said earlier that she'd set up automatic backups, she hadn't been exaggerating. Between late-night desperation and a little unavoidable paranoia, she'd built a modest personal safety net. Encrypted cloud syncs, redundant copies, and a tiny habit of recording important conversations when things smelled off. It was not the work of a villain, it was the work of someone who'd once had her laptop die the day before a presentation and swore never again. The memory that tracked back to the present was small and precise. The evening she'd been too jittery to trust her memory. She had, almost without thinking, placed her phone on the edge of Kevin's desk, camera facing the table like an innocuous decorative object. She'd slid it into airplane mode, so it wouldn't ping anyone, and set the voice memo app to record through the pocket earbud she'd looped under her blouse. A spyware-era paranoia? Maybe, but enough to keep her awake for months? Definitely not. Now, with the office humans circling like hawks and the IT undercurrent still raw, that tiny, furtive habit became their strongest asset. Are you serious? Margaret from Kevin's team asked when Zoe told her the plan. They were holed up in a secure conference room, windows blacked with blinds, laptops open like surgical instruments. Margaret's nails tapped the table in a rhythm that meant she was worried but professional. You recorded the dinner? I recorded the dinner, Zoe said simply. No drama. No apology. Just facts. The audio file existed, time-stamped, raw, and honest. It captured Kevin's laugh, the cadence of his voice, the context around the moments that would, if doctored, be turned into a scandal. Kevin's eyes flicked to her impressed, a tiny glint of admiration mixing with the adrenaline. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. Would you have let me? She replied. He opened his mouth, considered it, then smiled with that dangerous half-grin that suggested he knew he would have argued but secretly been grateful she'd done it. She moved fast, methodical. We distribute copies to 3 places, she said. 1. Anonymous tip to the FBI Cybercrime Division. 2. Secure drop to a journalist I trust, Ava Moreno at the Ledger. She's done corporate investigations before and will hold until the evidence is solid. 3. SEC whistleblower portal. All with metadata attached. Timestamps, file hashes, everything that proves authenticity. Kevin's breath stuck for a beat. The SEC? He said. That escalates things. Exactly, Zoe said. If they try to bury this in gossip, the legal trail will show up. It's not just about leaking. It's about who can verify the truth faster than they can referee the lie. Margaret's fingers flew. I can draft the reports. Legal will want to sanitize before submission. No. Zoe's voice was calm but uncompromising. It needs to go raw. The moment we try to dress it up, someone will say we manipulated it. Raw proves we had nothing to hide. Kevin's face shifted. The man who architected deals and took meetings at dawn showed a rare sliver of vulnerability. You know this could ruin you, he said quietly. If your name is associated with whistleblowing or with a public fight against private interests, it could follow you. It could, she said, or it could stop them from making me their puppet. He studied her, and in that look was a calculus Zoe had never wanted to be part of. Exposure versus agency. Privacy versus power. She had been small for a long time. She was done being moved by other people's hands without her consent. Minutes later, they set the plan in motion. Zoe, fingers steady, uploaded copies. She used an anonymizing chain, a burner account tied to a VPN, then proper legal channels to make sure the trail couldn't be trivially erased. She used the journalist's secure drop because Ava had been careful and had a reputation for resisting pressure. The FBI tip was terse but descriptive. The SEC submission included file hashes and a note that this was part of an extortion attempt that targeted a corporate officer through personal contacts. Margaret hit send on a separate internal note to Kevin's attorney, copying the head of security. There was a moment of suspended silence when everything was pushed out into the ether, like letting go of a lifeline and watching it float. Then the office replied, though not with the orderly logic Zoe had hoped for. the blackmailers reacted. And they reacted badly, fast, and ugly. The people who'd paid Tom had checks to collect and panic to manage. Panic became sloppiness. Sloppiness became a rash of activity to cover tracks, phone calls, frantic emails to third parties, and, crucially, leaks. Kevin watched the feeds like someone watching a distant storm close in. "They'll try to drown us in noise," he said, "and then they hope the noise becomes reality," Zoe added. She felt an odd, cold clarity. Their enemies did not need to be truthful. They only needed to be louder and cruder. To manufacture outrage before verification, legal counsel arrived in force. Private security put extra men by the server room doors. Margaret routed PR notes to the communications director that were deliberately vague and defensive, emphasizing that a security incident was under investigation and that employees' privacy was being taken seriously. The PR team overloaded internal channels with messages about confidentiality and steps being taken, creating a public perimeter around Zoe and Kevin while their legal team prepared for leaks. On a monitor in the corner, a feed scrolled. Encrypted traffic spiking from an unknown source. Tom's access pattern was a skeleton of deliberate steps and careful deletions. Someone was trying to remap what they'd taken, perhaps to sell pieces to different outlets. Whoever was organizing this had more reach than a disgruntled ex-employee. This smelled like a plan executed by people who understood both corporate greed and media cycles. And then, as if the universe liked theatrical timing, Zoe's phone buzzed. Her roommate had texted, "Did you see?" with a link. Her stomach dropped. Zoe tapped it. The headline on a gossip site had already run. "Billionaire CEO caught in office romance secrets revealed." The images were doctored. A still from the recording had been edited, cropped, and juxtaposed with out-of-context search queries from Zoe's browser history. The article promised an exposé, the kind that trades nuance for traffic. Zoe's heart lurched, but she refused to let it commandeer her voice. She forwarded the link immediately to Margaret, to legal, and to Ava, the journalist, with a single note. "Counter now. Metadata soonest." Margaret's reply came in all caps. "We're on it." Kevin sat back, fists clenched. "They're testing us," he said. "If the board smells scandal before we can show them proof, they'll panic." Kevin. "And if we don't move fast, the narrative sticks," Zoe said. They moved faster. Ava Moreno replied within the hour, terse and steady. "Received. We'll verify. Don't post anything else. I'll coordinate with your counsel." Her tone was a rock in a small, churning sea. Legal drafted an immediate internal memo to the board, with the original upload hashes and an explanation of the decoy operation. PR went public with a short statement about an ongoing security incident and emphasized that any leaked material was likely manipulated. The push was careful. It didn't deny the existence of the recordings, only clarified their context and warned against consuming anything unverified. The first wave of public reaction was messy. Gossip ran faster than logic, and some fans of sensational headlines had already spread the doctored screenshots across social platforms. Zoe saw her name in comments that ranged from sympathetic to vicious. Her roommate called, then texted, then called again, the panic audible through the line. "They've got a headline," she said. "My phone is ringing off the hook. How do we—" "Breathe," Zoe said, "because panic was an enemy with teeth. We are using primary sources. Ava will hold. Legal will have the hashes. Don't engage with the trolls. Don't amplify." Her roommate's voice slowed. "I don't want you to get hurt. You won't get hurt because we're going to make sure the people who profit from this are the ones who look guilty," Zoe said, and the certainty in her own voice steadied her. It felt a little like steel in her mouth. Kevin reached across the table, palm warm against hers. "You were brilliant," he said, low and private. "You thought like a defender." Zoe's cheeks warmed. "I thought like someone who didn't want strangers deciding the shape of my life." He nodded. "Same purpose, different tool set. I've been terrified since I saw Tom on that feed, but I'm also impressed." He gave her a crooked smile that contained both an apology and something close to gratitude. "You're not just an employee now. You're a strategist." The words landed like a small currency. Zoe felt the air change around her. The dynamic between them had shifted. She was no longer merely the woman who'd Googled escape fantasies. She was an operative in a game that demanded strategy, patience, and a willingness to use truth as armor. Still, the leak had opened the public stage. The blackmailers had scored a foothold by manufacturing narrative before proof arrived. The battle had moved from private servers to tabloid pages. Before we dive into the fallout, like this. Subscribe, share, and comment what city you're watching from. And if you'd stand with Zoe, type Team Zoe in the comments right now. This part gets messy. The morning news cycle hit like a bomb. Zoe woke to 6 missed calls from her roommate, 3 frantic texts, and 1 link that made her stomach drop through the mattress. Billionaire CEO Kevin Davis accused of coercion secret office affair leaked. The article was everywhere by sunrise, syndicated across gossip sites, financial rumor blogs, and even mid-tier news channels hungry for clicks. And there she was, Zoe Douglas, pixelated and distorted beside Kevin in doctored screenshots, time-stamped and edited to imply a scandal that had never existed. One caption read, "Underling or accomplice. Employees' late-night visits raise questions." Another, "Power imbalance or secret romance. Industry experts weigh in." Zoe slammed her phone face down, but the buzzing continued trending hashtags, 1,000 strangers deciding the shape of her dignity. Her face felt hot, but her hands were freezing. She dressed for work slowly, deliberately, a shield of professional armor, even if she felt like a cracked plate glued together overnight. Prudent Globe's lobby was a silent gauntlet. People stared. Some whispered. A few avoided eye contact altogether, treating her like a grenade someone had forgotten to defuse. Every monitor in the building flashed a company-wide alert, emergency all-staff meeting scheduled. PR announcement forthcoming. Elevators dinged like accusations. The ride to her floor felt too bright, too loud. When the doors opened, the sound of voices dropped in a way that made Zoe's skin crawl. Someone near the printers murmured, "That's her." Another whispered, "She Googled how to seduce him too, it's in the article." Zoe clenched her jaw. They didn't know her. They didn't know anything. HR summoned her within 10 minutes. The conference room was cold. Too cold. A woman with a tight bun and overly calm voice gestured toward a chair. "Miss Douglas, we're opening an inquiry into the allegations involving you and Mr. Davis." "Allegations that are false," Zoe said. "Possibly," the HR rep replied. "But perception creates liability. Your late-night meeting with Mr. Davis was mentioned. So were your recent search terms." Zoe's cheeks burned. Those searches were jokes. Stress. Late-night venting. "Everyone does it. Perhaps," the woman said, folding her hands. "But the board is deeply concerned." Of course they were. They were sharks, smelling blood, not hers, not Kevin's. Just the blood of inconvenience. "Until we conclude the inquiry," the HR rep continued, "please refrain from unsupervised meetings with Mr. Davis. And understand you may be placed on leave if this escalates." If, as though escalation wasn't already ripping through the building like fire, Zoe walked out before her voice could betray her. By 10 a.m., the top floor was a war zone. Cameras were stationed outside the building. A Reuters journalist had been escorted out of the lobby. The PR director was pacing with a cordless phone, repeating the phrase, "No comment yet, we're aligning messaging." And somewhere behind those closed boardroom doors, Kevin Davis was being shredded alive. Zoe caught glimpses through the glass. Board members leaning forward, voices raised, hands slicing the air with outrage. A projection screen displaying the doctored images. Her throat tightened. She wanted to run, to fight, to disappear, to scream. Instead, she watched. Kevin stood at the head of the room, spine straight, jaw locked, taking hit after hit. His suit was impeccable, but there was something vulnerable in the way his fingers dug into the back of a chair like he was physically restraining himself from tearing the room apart. 3 board members argued loudly about the acquisition deal, accusing him of destabilizing the company with impropriety. Another insisted they suspend him pending investigation. Then something shifted. Kevin stepped forward, palms flat on the table. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. There was no coercion, he said. No misconduct. And Zoe Douglas is not a bargaining chip, nor a scapegoat for someone else's agenda. The room stilled. If you're looking for someone to sacrifice, he continued, it won't be her. And if you think this will push me to abandon the Cranford acquisition, you're underestimating me and overestimating whoever fed you those lies. The PR director whispered, horrified. Oh my God, he's going off script. Board members balked. Kevin, you cannot publicly defend an employee involved in this. The optics, the truth, he cut in, matters more than optics. A dangerous, raw honesty. And for a moment, Zoe saw not the billionaire but the man who laughed at her Google searches, who confessed loneliness over spring rolls, who had looked at her like she was someone worth hearing. He wasn't protecting an employee. He was standing with her, and he was risking everything to do it. When the board meeting adjourned, the hallway erupted with speculation. Is he admitting a relationship? He can't be serious. What if she sues? This could tank our stock. Zoe felt the weight of 100 eyes pinning her down. She fled to the stairwell, leaning against the concrete wall, shaking. A moment later, the door opened. Kevin, still in his suit, still composed. But his breathing wasn't steady, not for a man who usually exhaled calm like oxygen. I shouldn't have dragged you into this, he said. You didn't drag me, Zoe replied. They're using me. There's a difference. They're attacking you because of me. His hands curled into fists. If you want to walk away from this from me, I'll understand. She let out a hollow laugh. I don't want to walk away, but I need you to stop treating me like a liability. His eyes snapped up. Zoe, that's not how I see you. Then stop acting like I'm fragile. I don't need you to shield me from fallout. I need you to respect that I'm in this fight too. He hesitated, the kind of hesitation only a man used to total control would show when confronted by someone refusing to be controlled. Fine, he said quietly. But if they push for your suspension, I'll handle it. And if the press twists this further, I'll handle it. He stepped closer. Too close. And if this ruins me, she swallowed. I never asked you to choose between me and your career. I'm not choosing, he murmured, but I won't let you burn because of me. Their faces were inches apart. A storm between them. Then, Margaret burst in, panting. Kevin, Zoe, you need to see this. Now. They rushed to the boardroom. A courier box sat on the table. The board huddled around it, pale-faced. Inside, cushioned in foam, lay a sleek external hard drive, the kind used in corporate espionage. A note was taped to it. Proof. Withdraw the acquisition. A board member plugged it in against PR's objections. Files appeared instantly, copied directory trees, screenshots, communication logs, and then a name surfaced. Someone inside the company had authorized access. Someone with clearance high enough to bypass firewalls. Zoe's heart stopped. Kevin went rigid, because the name blinking on the screen was one he knew, one he trusted, one he'd never suspect, someone close to him, someone powerful, someone with motive. The room erupted. Zoe just stared at the screen, pulse roaring in her ears. Betrayal. And a coming war. Quick reminder before the takedown, like, subscribe, share, and comment the city you're watching from. If you want Zoe to lead and not be led, shout Team Zoe in the comments. This chapter is the one where chairs get pushed back and decisions stop being theoretical. The name on the screen had settled into Zoe's bones like a cold fact. Victor Hale, Chief Operating Officer. Trusted colleague. The kind of executive who smiled at earnings calls and smiled harder in private when deals slipped his way. Zoe's mind skittered through 1,000 small interactions. Victor's polite nod in weekly briefings. His approving glance at Kevin's strategic choices, the way he'd always been first to the after-work networking events with the right people in the room. Motive lined up like tidy files. Cranford, the acquisition under dispute, threatened Victor's side deals. If Kevin pulled back, Victor's preferred bidder could step in, scoop up assets, and rewire long-standing relationships. In boardrooms where millions were chess pieces, loyalty was often a financial calculation. Kevin watched the image of Victor's credentials on the screen with a slow, taut expression. He had clearance, he said, He can sign off internal transfers. He has the authority. And the motive, Zoe added, which makes this less like a heist and more like an inside job. They needed proof that Victor had coordinated the blackmail, not just ties suggesting motive. Suspicion alone wouldn't hold in court or in a boardroom that smelled like blood. They needed a spectacle that would do what their legal filings could only begin to do: expose intent in a way the media and regulators couldn't ignore. Kevin's plan was surgical and old-fashioned. Bait, camera, confrontation. They would present the blackmailers with false final leverage in a controlled setting and have law enforcement ready to move once proof of extortion manifested. Zoe's part: stay visible enough to be tempting but invisible enough to be safe. She had been pushed into being small for too long. Now she would be the bait that led to a trap. But she would not be the prey. They set the stage in a deserted wing of Prudent Globe office lights dimmed, security cameras focused, legal and a discreet police detail on standby. Margaret arranged the press embargo and looped Ava Moreno into the plan, asking the journalist to be ready to hit publish the moment the sting confirmed the blackmailer's intent. "Whatever happens," Kevin told Zoe, voice flat and certain, "we do it legally. No theatrics that let them claim harassment. We have to show chain of custody, clear admission of extortion, and the link back to Victor." Zoe met his eyes. "And no one uses me as collateral," she said. "You're not collateral," he replied. "You're an equal." For the first time since everything began, those words landed like an alignment rather than a promise. They baited the trap with a file, an innocuous-looking folder with a fabricated schedule of payouts tied to the Cranford withdrawal items that would spark interest from anyone hoping to broker a deal. The file was staged. The login attempts were audible pings on monitored channels. The decoy glowed like a moth trap. At 9:12 p.m., shoes clicked in the hallway a little too deliberately. 3 men, well-dressed, unostentatious, and very composed, stepped off the elevator. They wore the neutral armor of professionals who did not want eyes on their faces. Tom, of course, waited outside the door. His presence on the feed had been anticipated. He was the conduit. These were the buyers. Zoe's heart beat a new rhythm, focused and fierce. She sat at the table, the fake folder open on the laptop in front of her. The cameras rolling. Kevin stayed back, obscured by a partition but visible on the monitors, his jaw a blade of resolve. Law enforcement stood out of sight, their radios clipped and quiet. The men came in with a practiced script. "The file looks valuable," the lead said, voice smooth as new leather. "We've been patient, but patience has a price." "Name your price," the second supplied, all polite menace. Tom smiled in a way Zoe had seen on the feed, an expression that meant he'd been well compensated for his part. "Validation," the lead said. "We want guarantee public withdrawal of the Cranford bid. A signed, notarized notice. We want confirmation on the 48-hour window. Deliverable, and we walk. No publicity." The air thinned. Kevin's voice came over a hidden speaker, low and modulated for the room. "We don't negotiate outside the law." The lead inclined his head as if to humor protocol. "We're not negotiating with you, are we? We're negotiating with the asset holder." He smiled at Zoe in a way that made her skin crawl. "Miss Douglas, you'll leave a statement to the board. We'll show proof that your involvement has compromised his position. Or you'll not leave at all." The threat was implied and ugly. A man with power and a pocket of money could make quiet threats sound like inevitable facts. The second man reached toward a small device, an external drive ready to transmit, and then things moved fast. An officer's voice broke the calm. "Hands where we can see them." The men froze for a moment, then reached the signal for the arrest team. The room erupted into action, officers stepping out from shadowed corners, legal hands securing evidence, the cameras rolling as if the building itself had decided to document its own vindication. A scuffle broke against the sterile carpet. One of the men shoved a table, the laptop skidding. A hand brushed Zoe's shoulder with a violent, reckless force. She could have recoiled, but she had a plan. Distraction. She grabbed the nearest pen. Not to hurt, but to create a noise and movement the cameras would capture, an instinctive, theatrical motion that drew the lead's eyes and bought a fraction of a second. In that fraction, the officer moved in. The second man found his hands cuffed before he could reach the drive. Tom tried to flee. A security guard intercepted him in the corridor and immobilized him with the kind of practiced hold that spoke to rehearsed enforcement. It was messy and beautiful in the same breath, the choreography of justice. When it was over, the men sat handcuffed, the external drive unplugged and catalogued, the feed preserved every minute, the lead's threats, the transactional language, the way Tom had smiled at a camera as if the payday had been worth the risk. The recording would be central in court and in the court of public opinion. They moved quickly after the arrests. Ava Moreno's article hit the wires within an hour. The story was careful but damning. It documented the sting, the extortion attempt, and connected the dots back to Victor Hale with timestamps, emails, and the hard drive's metadata. The piece did not editorialize. It presented verified facts with surgical clarity. Victor was called into a meeting where legal and board members confronted him with the evidence. His face drained of color as emails he'd authored were read aloud, and his strategic conversations were shown to have coordinated with third parties. The betrayal was a slow, terrible thing, a privilege turned into a weapon. Kevin stood in front of the board and, with a voice stripped of performative calm, recommended an independent regulatory inquiry and requested immediate suspension for Victor pending investigation. "We will not be blackmailed," he said. "We will not allow private greed to corrupt the company's governance." The boardroom that had once murmured about optics now murmured about legal exposure, and that shimmer of power shifted. Regulatory letters were drafted. The acquisition was paused, not out of cowardice but to protect the company from further manipulation. In the aftermath, Zoe felt fatigue like a heavy wet cloth, but also something fierce and new. Ownership. She had been bait and blade in the same moment, and had lived to see the blade used for truth. Late that night, when the building emptied and muted itself into the hush of exhausted machines, Zoe's phone buzzed with a single, anonymous message. "You haven't seen the last of me." Her stomach clenched. The takedown had been real and public, but the message implied the war was not over. Someone with resources and malice still wanted a final word. Kevin read it over her shoulder, his hand finding hers in a grip that was steady and warm. "Then we prepare," he said. She looked at him, at the man who'd chosen her over a deal, and for the first time understood the full cost of the world they were in. Before we close this book, quick reminder. Like, subscribe, share, and comment which city you're watching from. If Zoe's grit moved you, tell me now, and type Team Zoe. This is the last scene for now, but it isn't the end. The weeks that followed felt like the slow unwinding after a high, a city exhaling. The regulatory letters that had been drafted in the heat of the sting opened into formal investigations. Subpoenas arrived and were met with stacks of verified evidence. Ava Moreno's exposé had set the narrative straight, and the ledger's careful timeline made it impossible for talk show pundits to spin simple sensationalism from truth. Victor Hale resigned before the board could vote on suspension. His resignation was polite on paper and surgical in effect. Several of his allies quietly exited the company that same week, their departures framed as strategic realignments. The Cranford acquisition was paused for review, the deal's architecture reworked in public and scrutinized in private. The board itself went through a purge, new members, tightened governance, independent oversight. Prudent Globe had been wounded, but the wound had been disinfected with sunlight and procedure. It hurt, but it would heal more honestly. The company's PR narrative shifted from scandal to resilience. The press releases were blunt without being defensive. Security improvements, an ongoing cooperation with federal investigators, an affirmation that no employee would be sacrificed to quiet malicious actors. The stock, predictably, shivered, then steadied as investors refocused on fundamentals rather than tabloid drama. And Zoe's name drifted from the comment sections of sleazy blogs back into the company's strategic documents. HR cleared her. The inquiry found no wrongdoing. The search history that had been turned into fodder for clicks was reframed by lawyers and journalists as late-night venting, not evidence of misconduct. The narrative that had been used to shame her collapsed under facts, timestamps, metadata, and the public record of who had been paid to manufacture scandal. Margaret slid an envelope across Zoe's desk one afternoon with a small, private smile. Inside was an official letter, an offer. Director of Strategic Initiatives, Prudent Globe Industries, a seat at the strategy table, a defined budget, authority over a cross-functional team, protection spelled out in legalese guaranteed counsel, strict privacy protocols, and a clause that prevented retaliatory reassignment. It was the role Zoe had once imagined in a fantasy where she didn't have to barter dignity for influence. She read it twice, then a third time. Power was rarely gifted. It was usually taken, or negotiated from a bruising position. The letter smelled like compromise made intentional. She pushed it back across to Margaret with a calm she didn't entirely feel. "I have conditions," she said. Margaret didn't blink. "Name them." Zoe's list was brief and unwavering. No tokenism. Full hiring autonomy for her team. A clear anti-retaliation clause. A seat at the risk committee, and an explicit clause that any personal relationship with senior staff would be handled transparently, with consent and counsel, no hidden decisions behind closed doors. She would accept the mandate, not a medal. She would shape outcomes, not be a curiosity. They negotiated like adults in a world that sometimes pretended childhood never ended. The legal language shifted, protections were tightened, and Zoe walked away with a title that came with power and a contract that read like a promise. She would not be moved without due cause, and any attack on her role would be met with corporate and legal rebuttal. When she signed, it felt less like victory and more like reclamation. The public narrative followed that arc too. Kevin issued statements acknowledging the turmoil and promising company-wide reforms. He was scrutinized, of course. Being a billionaire in the center of scandal is a glare that doesn't dim easily, but his decision to stand publicly by Zoe to refuse to let her be the sacrificial lamb won a different kind of respect from some quarters. He lost some votes in the boardroom, but he gained a clearer conscience and the quiet gratitude of people who recognized authenticity when it appeared. One late evening, after the board reshuffle and the media dust had settled into a manageable gray, Zoe and Kevin met in the same office where it had all begun. The city lights were patient, distant, and kind in their steady blink. Milo, improbably alive and now sitting in a new pot on Zoe's desk, seemed unbothered by human melodrama. They spoke like two people who had been through a storm and come out with more questions than answers, but also with a strange steadiness. They traded the small, necessary things first, logistical housekeeping about disclosures. A calendar of avoidable press windows, reminders about boundaries. The talk was practical. It was also intimate for its brutal honesty. "I never wanted to make your life riskier," Kevin said finally. Voice raw in a way Zoe had rarely heard. "I never wanted to be collateral," Zoe replied. "I also don't want us to perform righteousness for optics. If we're together, if we choose this, we make rules. We ask permission from each other before we make public moves. We don't weaponize silence. We practice consent." He nodded slowly, each assent measured. "Transparent," he agreed. "Counseled. No secrets." "And if the board asks for distance?" she continued. "Then we decide," he said. "We don't let others decide because they're afraid of what a woman at the table might change." She laughed, a short exhale that was more relief than humor. "That's a sentence I never expected to hear in a boardroom." They spoke about ordinary things too. The pleasures of cooking badly and pretending it was art. The comfort of a good book before sleep. The strangeness of being scrutinized. They admitted fears, his about trust, hers about losing herself in a public narrative that preferred caricature to complexity. "You could take the easy path," Zoe said at one point, soft but direct. "You could make me vice chair or give me the bonus and let the cameras applaud. I don't want the easy path. I want the honest one." Kevin took her hand. "Then we take it together." They kissed, then not the breathless, dizzying kind of a forbidden fling, but a steady, consenting kiss that felt like an agreement more than an accident. It was a small, private seal on a messy public life. It did not solve everything, but it recalibrated the axis. Later that night, Zoe opened her phone and scrolled through messages. Among the routine notes, one new line shivered at the top. An unknown wire transfer notice to an offshore account, a small amount, but unmistakable. Attached. A tiny emoji. A crow's feather. She stared at it, pulse quickening at the hint of unfinished business. The sting had taken down its architects. But someone still wanted a last word. A final nudge. She could have let it sit, an unread threat. Instead, she forwarded it to Margaret and Ava with a single line. Noted. We trace. The message's ambiguity was part threat, part taunt. It would be a test later, not today. For now, there were meetings to lead, a team to build, and a company that needed work. Milo needed watering too, and Zoe, who had once Googled escape routes in a moment of comedic despair, poured a small stream of water into the succulent's pot and watched the leaves pulse with life. If you loved Zoe's courage and want more stories like this, like, subscribe, share, and comment which city you're watching from and tell me if you want another chapter. Milo blinked in the lamplight, small and green, and the camera pulled back as the office settled not into silence, but into the careful hum of things rebuilding.